Okay, well, hello, buenas tardes, everybody. It's me and Profesor here, and this is we're going to try again. Last week we had a little bit of difficulty getting the video in which I reviewed the readings from a couple of weeks ago. I was almost finished. I just got about a minute and a half left to go. All of a sudden, my connection died, and the video was lost forever, lost into cyberspace, that great internet graveyard up in the sky, whatever term you wish to use. But fortunately, I had some old videos from the fall semester for the History 108 class, so I just wanted to substitute that. So we'll try again. Hopefully, the connection will be just fine, and I can get this video to you with no problem. All right. Well, today I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the readings which correspond to chapters 15 through 17 of Daughter of Fortune, and and of course, these are the chapters which correspond to with the chapter names El Dorado, Business Dealings, and Soiled Doves. And these were the first of three chapters which make up the final part three of Daughter of Fortune. Because as you know by now, Isabel Allende has split up the text, split the story into three large parts, large portions. We finished with a chapter with parts one and two. So so right now, so you've already gone through the first half, or roughly the first half of part three, and then for the readings you have right now, we're now finishing up with with the readings, not just in part three, but the entirety of Daughter Fortune. So I'll say a few things about what's happening in these chapters 15 through 17. This roughly takes into the period from late 1849 into early 1850, and and the chapters which corresponded to this, and you already, of course, went, you already had coverage of these chapters in the Rolls and Bean text in the last quiz, but I'll say a few quick things about those chapters anyway. So these are the chapters 11 and 12 of the Rolls and Bean text. Okay, well, let me go ahead and get on with this, and I'll try to keep the video less than 20 minutes. But you've heard that story before. I say this video is only going to be 50 minutes. Everybody ends up being 22, 23 minutes. So, but I'll give it a try this time and make sure I come in around 20 minutes. But for sure, I'll try to keep it less than 25. All right. Um, okay. The story picks up in late 1849, and and by this point in time in California, the first major wave of the people coming into the region for gold, of course, had been going on since the spring of that year. Even though it had been over a year since James Marshall's discovery on Sutter's mill back in early 1848, of course, this is way before the days of super highways, the Delta Airlines, Amtrak, or maybe not Amtrak, but if you're familiar with the East Coast, then of course definitely Amtrak is a quick way of getting by. But you know what I'm getting at, everybody. Long before the days of rapid transit, mass communications, public transportation, all of that fun stuff. It took a long time for news to travel from California to other parts of the U.S. And of course the world. And then about a year later is when you might say the first arrivals, the Argonauts, or as the late historian J.S. Holliday would have said, the world began to rush in by spring of 1849. So in late 1849, by this point in the story, and of course we're talking now about the El Dorado chapter 15. Eliza and Dow had pretty much set up shop in set up shop in shut. Try saying that 10 times fast. Set up shop in Sacramento. Try saying that 10 times fast. Dow, of course, was looking to begin to reestablish his medicine practice, to pick up the lessons that the Zhong Yi had taught him, and of course, Eliza was looking for Joaquin. So the chapter goes on to explain all the different things that Eliza encounters. For instance, she comes across a wild scene with a bear and bull fighting each other in a ring. And this is actually kind of the things that the Californians used to do for recreation back in those days, roughly around the 1820s into the 1830s and in the early 1840s. A lot of American visitors who came to California, many of them did business and even married into the California families, were really amazed and shocked at seeing all these wild festivals, fandangos, tertulias, whatever you want to call them, and a lot of these events had these wild and crazy and reckless animal fights. Not like what I guess what the Romans used to do with the Christians versus the lions, that type of thing. So Eliza was definitely shocked about this, but again, this is nothing new. Allende is right on when she describes this type of scene. The chapter continues with Eliza talking about the various characters that she meets, and Allende makes a very interesting point that Eliza had fallen in love with the idea of freedom, and and she talks about and Allende, no, I'm sorry, through Eliza, Allende talks about how people are starting to equality. So interestingly, it seems that in the American mindset, the idea of Jefferson that we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, you really weren't finding that much, say, in the rest of the United States. But it looked like you had to go west to California to, in essence, find this type of notion that Jefferson talked about, which is a bit ironic because, of course, you know the story by now. Thomas Jefferson, of course, kept African American slaves until he died in the 1820s, 1826 to be exact. Interestingly, as Allende rediscovers herself and discovers freedom, it seems that Joaquin's memory begins to fade away in the distance. So she's got to keep reminding herself why she's actually coming to California coming to California in the first place. It seems that right now she's realizing she's chasing a ghost, she's chasing a memory, but she doesn't want to admit that it's really just a ghost in the memory that she's really looking for. Um, um, let's see. Okay. Oh, at this point in time, Eliza also discovers an interesting lesson that Paulina del Valle had known much earlier in the story uh, that it's easy to make money off the miners, not so much mine for the gold or yellow crap, as Paulina said a few earlier. So Eliza began to find ways to make money. She, with her writing skills that Rose had taught her some years ago, she begins to use that to write letters from homesick miners wanting to write back to their loved ones back in, say, whether it was Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, and any of those places. Interesting. This is something that J.S. Holiday used to talk about. A lot of the miners, when they would come into these towns, whether it was dry diggings, uh, Dead Man's Gulch, Coyote Flat, Poker Town, Hangville, you get the idea. A lot of these towns had, of course, wild and wacky names. A lot of the men would write stories. Well, I heard stories that James has come across these girls, and they sing and they dance and they do this, and there's liquor and gambling, blah blah blah. But that's what James has told me. I haven't seen any of it myself. Obviously, a lot of these men were lying in their letters back to home. They would not admit that they did a lot of, shall we say, naughty and nasty things. Of course, the sensibilities of the culture prohibited that, but it's interesting in the letters in that they hinted that they did this stuff personally, but they wouldn't say it in so many words. So interesting perspective. Allende kind of touches upon this in the story, but J.S. Holiday really talked a lot about that in a lot of the work that he did about the gold rush and the miners. Okay, business dealings. That's chapter 16. Okay. Oh, one more thing about chapter 15. Of course, chapter 15 at the end is when Eliza encounters the traveling wild show. So, kind of keeping the thing of wild and naughty and raucous stuff. Eliza encounters the traveling wild show or body show, whatever term you wish to use. Here's where the characters of Joe Bone Crusher, Babalu the Bat, and Tom No Tribe, and some of the girls, Esther and a few others, come into scene. So Eliza, you might say, kind of finds a family with this band of misfits, for lack of a better term. All right, in chapter 16, the business dealings chapter, um, John Summer is working now for Paulina, and she arrives with the goods that Paulina had ordered, including ice. Paulina realized that uh, it was that long for the days of refrigeration, you got to keep the stuff cold. So the ice of the glaciers, which was mentioned earlier in the story, this is the stuff that's also being transported too in the cargo that John has. Um, Interestingly, John encounters the Rodriguez brothers and Feliciano and his brother, in essence, kind of complain about Paulina's antics or her tactics, but they know they're powerless to stop her because, in fact, as John Summers points out, there's no way to stop her. So Paulina's business acumen is really coming to the forefront here in chapter 16. John also encounters Jacob Todd, who now goes by Jacob Fremont, and the utopian community that Jacob had was wanting to get involved in didn't quite pan out. So now Jacob reinvents himself as a writer, Jacob Fremont. And it's interesting that Allende chose the term Fremont because, of course, as he saw in the previous readings in the Rawls and Bean text, John C. Fremont was the famous Pathfinder. So it's interesting that that continuity, of course, in the Jacob Fremont character, Allende adds an extra E to the name. But I really think that there's a connection here. I think it was because of John C. Fremont had this, I guess you could say, personality, a free spirit, wouldn't take any crap from anybody, whether it was even other military officials, President Polk, or whoever happened to be above him. John Fremont just pretty much did his own thing, and I think Jacob Fremont, in that respect, resembles the things that John C. Fremont used to do back in the earlier in the 1840s. Okay. Also in chapter 16, we see where John wants Jacob to help find Eliza. So of course the Summers family knows that Eliza is missing. They think that she's in They think that she's in California, and so now Jacob is enlisted to try to help in the search for Eliza. And then at the end of chapter 16, a little bit more discussion about who's who in the caravan. So we hear more about Joe's character, Joe's personality, Babalu, and uh, and also some of the prostitutes who were in the caravan. They were known as the soiled doves. I guess that was a term that was used in some respect back in those days. And speaking of soiled doves, that's the name for chapter 17, and it's now December of 1849. And Joe and the girls are settling into a barn into the rainy season, and one of their neighbors is a Quaker blacksmith by the name of James Morton. So interestingly, how you have this religious person, this devout Quaker, but he has pretty good ties and relations with the with his traveling band of misfits and prostitutes and other wild and wacky characters. But I think that was part of the essence that again is getting at, in that when you come to a place like California, um, you don't have a lot of institutions, you might say, to really help you out. You got to take care of each other. So it doesn't matter if, let's say, if you were a prostitute or a devout Mormon or a devout Quaker, you got to help each other in those rough in that rough environment, that rough climate, and that appears to be one of the lessons here that Allende is getting at here in chapter nine, chapter 19. Okay, let me see what else I should mention here about I'm sorry, chapter 17. So let me see what else I should mention here at this point in time. Oh, one other note, one final thing I want to say about this is that one of the characters that we meet in the chapter is, of course, the infamous Jack. Um, and this is actually the character in the Joaquin Murieta legend, because one thing that Allende does, as the story goes along, she begins to incorporate the legend of Joaquin Murieta, who of course is mentioned in the Rawls and Bean text. Joaquin Murieta, without giving too much away about the story, the legend was that he was avenging what had happened to his family when some Yankee miners they apparently killed his brother, they raped his wife. There's versions as to what actually happened in the story, but you hear stories about this legend, this Napoleon of the West. Coming out to avenge injustice against the Mexicano miners, and big stories begin to unfold by early 1850 about this a roving bandit, this Napoleon type of character who's avenging injustice, sort of a Robin Hood in reverse, I guess you could say. And one of the parts of the Joaquin with the legend is that Joaquin had this right hand man who was really evil and vicious and nasty. His name invariably had just been Jack, Three Finger Jack, or Three Finger Jack Garcia. And apparently Jack came across into the barn where Joe, Eliza, and the rest of the party had been. and um, um, excuse me. A little coffee this before I started taping here. Um, okay, well, kind of lost my place. Okay. All right. So, but the one who did help out in terms of the surgery for Jack, who had a bit of a medical issue, was Dow. Dow had reunited with Eliza at this point in time, and Dow had helped out to cure Jack of the gangrene that had developed in his finger. So apparently, what I ended up saying is that it's from here where the story of Jack becoming three-fingered Jack starts to emerge. So again, interesting how I ended brings in this old California myth, makes it part of the story, and puts her own spin on things as the chapter 17 begins to unfold. The chapter ends with the with a fire which destroys the barn and wipes out all the possessions of Joe, Babalu, Tom No Tribe, and the rest of the group. But the community coming together to help out Joe and in essence help them rebuild their lives. So a very important theme right there of community spirit, friendship, everybody helping each other out, that type of thing. That is really evident here in chapter 17. Okay, now to quickly turn our attention now to some of the things happening in chapters 11 and 12. And these are the chapters entitled Racial Oppression and Conflict. Okay, and then chapter 12 was called Culture and Anarchy. And without going into a lot of details about the things happening in each of these chapters, and actually, these are some of the points that I wanted to mention. I was trying to mention in the video that was interrupted last week, but I'll go ahead and say it here right now. Is that basically California in 1850, as it allowed people to become a state in 1850, California didn't have enough, shall we say, mature institutions. That is, political institutions, legal institutions, and I would say social and cultural institutions to really deal with the influx of people. Because when you compare a place like California to, say, Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York, it took a long time for those settlements, those early settlements, whether it was Jamestown, whether it was early Boston, Salem, Plymouth, all of those places. Those colonies, of course, started off as small villages, but then began to grow outward. So it took a long time for whether it was church customs, uh, civil institutions, legal customs, to really start to give people a sense that one, they were part of a community, then part of a village, then part of a hamlet, and then later on part of a county, and then over time part of a state. So you see what the point I'm getting at here, everybody, is that in the East Coast and in much of the Midwest, and even in the South too, there was plenty of time for those regions to develop strong institutions. And once those institutions were developed, then you might say it was quite an easy jump to go from colonies to states in the wake of the American Revolution. California didn't have that luxury. Everybody rushed in immediately, and then within a matter of say, about a year and a half, 2 years, bam, all of a sudden California becomes a state. So when you have that rapid movement into a region, and then you become a state overnight, that's going to lead to problems because how do you handle things such as legal disputes, racial tensions, religious conflicts, things of that nature? You really don't. So, not surprising, what happens is you get the rise of things such as vigilantism, racial oppression, whether it was toward the California Indians, whether it was toward the Mexican miners and the Mexican landowners, to the more infamous measures which were on the docket, so to speak, where of course it was the foreign miners tax, which targeted mainly the Mexican miners, and also the Land Act, the Land Law of 1851, which for the most part was designed to aim at the heart of the Californios. Again, remember everybody, these were the old-time Mexicans who lived in California way before the Yankees, way before the Americans came on the scene. So when you have these measures, and of course the way that the Chinese were dealt, I going to touch upon this too as a story of progressives. uh, these things happen quite frequently because again the state isn't mature enough to really deal with these social, political, ethnic, and racial problems. So those are a lot of things that are touched upon in chapter 11, and then chapter 12 focuses in on some of the Okay, and on some of the early works, some of the early poetry, early writings, early literature, which came along the scene, including the Joaquin Murieta legend. Mm. Um, you might say some of the early literature at the time wasn't very good. It wasn't very strong. Um, but for the most part, it does seem to reflect the rough and tumble nature of California in the early parts of the 1850s. I think once more and more women started to come into the region by the 1854, 1855, then that's when the state gradually began to mature on a number of levels. But when you have all these men in one area from 1849 to 1853, it's just chaos and bedlam. So, for all intents and purposes, everybody, California was indeed the Wild West for quite a while in the middle parts of the 19th century. And I think what you see reflected in both The Daughter of Fortune and here in these chapters 11 and 12 in the Rawls and Bean text, I think those points are brought about quite nicely. Okay, and look at the timer, and I'm just a little bit over 20 minutes, so I actually kept my word at this time. So that's everybody. That's it for this review of last week's Daughter of Fortune readings. I'll have one more of these videos coming up next week as we wrap up the final four chapters of of Fortune, and then of course everybody start getting ready to submit your Daughter of Fortune character videos. So we'll start doing that. We'll get to that after we come back from the spring vacations. But I'll be back again one more time next week with the last of these six review videos about the story. All right, so that's it from here. That's it for El Profesor, and I'll talk to you guys again next week.